The champagne glass trembled slightly in Madison Harper's hand as the final notes of the quartet faded into silence. Applause echoed around the ballroom, polite and cold, just like everything else that night. Every detail of the engagement gala had been curated to perfection: golden chandeliers, crystal centerpieces, violins that sang Vivaldi like trained birds. But nothing could make her feel less like a lamb being led to slaughter. Her diamond heels ached. Her satin dress suffocated. Her smile was the biggest lie of all. She spotted her parents across the room, laughing too loudly at something Riley's father had said. The deal was done. Their companies would merge. The Harpers would avoid financial ruin. And Madison would marry a woman she had never met until 3 hours ago. Riley Chun. The name was sharp, crisp, efficient like her. Madison had expected someone cold and indifferent. But nothing had prepared her for the woman who had walked in late, wearing a black tailored suit with combat boots instead of heels, her dark hair pulled into a loose bun, no makeup except for a slash of wine-red lipstick that made Madison's breath catch. Riley had barely looked at her, had offered a firm handshake instead of a kiss on the cheek, had said, in a voice too low for their parents to hear, "You don't have to pretend to like me." And then, as if sensing the panic under Madison's perfect posture, had added, "But I won't let you go through this alone either." Madison didn't know what to make of her. She still didn't. The night dragged. She felt eyes on her constantly: donors, press, socialites, old money heirs who looked at her like a possession changing hands. Every conversation was a performance. Every smile felt like betrayal. She excused herself and slipped into one of the side hallways, needing air, silence, anything but this gilded cage. And, of course, Riley followed. "You're going to make them worry," she said, leaning against the wall with the same casual arrogance Madison envied and resented. "Is that what you want?" "I needed a minute," Madison said, wrapping her arms around herself. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments, on a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference. Do you always follow people when they walk away? Only when they look like they're about to break. That cut deeper than it should have. Madison straightened her shoulders. "I'm fine." "You're not," Riley said simply, and something about the certainty in her voice made Madison's throat tighten. "But I get it. You didn't ask for this. Neither did I. So, let's be honest with each other." Madison turned to face her fully. "Honest."
"Yes."
"No pretending. No fake romance for the cameras unless we have to." But also, Riley stepped closer, not threatening, not smug, just steady. "I'm not going to treat you like a burden. If we're stuck in this, then I'm going to make damn sure you don't feel alone. Deal?" Madison blinked. Her heart thudded harder than it should have. "Why?" "Because you look like no one's ever chosen you for real. And that pisses me off more than this whole mess." That sentence lodged itself in her chest like a splinter.
She didn't respond. Couldn't.
Riley waited a moment longer, then nodded, as if that silence was enough. "Come on. Let's get back before your mother starts crying in Chanel." Later that night, alone in her bedroom at the Harper estate, Madison lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her engagement ring caught the moonlight. It was stunning. Flawless. Heavy. The whole day had been a blur of cameras, toasts, compliments soaked in poison. But all she could think about was the way Riley had looked at her. Not like a savior, not like a martyr, not even like a friend. Just a person.
Equal. Seen.
And the strangest part? Madison didn't know if that made her feel safe or terrified. 3 days later, the wedding happened. Quick, elegant, press-friendly. Madison stood beside Riley at the altar, hands trembling as vows were exchanged. There were no kisses, no promises of forever. Only the echo of silence between them and the faintest squeeze of Riley's hand over hers. A signal. "I'm here." The first night in their shared penthouse was a study in awkwardness. 2 bedrooms. 2 lives that didn't touch. Madison stood at the balcony, the cold wind cutting through her silk robe. She heard Riley enter behind her. "You don't have to talk," Riley said softly. "Not tonight." Just don't lie to me, okay? Madison turned. What would you even know about me lying? Because I've done it, Riley said, walking past her toward the kitchen. And I know how it eats you alive. She came back with 2 glasses of wine. So, here's to not pretending. Not for them. Not for anyone. Madison hesitated before accepting the glass. Their fingers brushed. A tiny spark, real or imagined, flared in her stomach. She took a sip, then another, then looked at the woman who is now, by every legal definition, her wife. You're not what I expected, Madison said quietly. Riley's mouth tilted into something almost like a smile. Neither are you. The first week of marriage was a masterclass in silence. Not the bitter kind, nor the awkward kind. It was the silence of 2 strangers orbiting the same space, careful not to touch, careful not to ask too much, careful not to say the wrong thing. Madison woke up every morning with the same heaviness in her chest, slipping into designer clothes that felt more like armor, and emerging from her room to find Riley already gone or reading quietly by the window with her feet on the coffee table. Riley didn't hover. She didn't interrogate. She didn't expect anything from Madison, and somehow that made it worse. Because Madison didn't know what to do with the absence of pressure. She had lived her entire life suffocating under someone else's expectations, her mother's, her father's, the board of directors, society's, and now that Riley had offered her something that felt like space, she didn't know how to breathe in it. On the 6th night, a storm rolled over the city. Madison sat curled on the end of the long velvet sofa in the living room, watching lightning flash through the floor-to-ceiling windows, her hands clasped too tightly in her lap. Her heart was racing. Storms always did that to her. She blamed childhood. Being locked in the dark bathroom during thunderstorms while her mother screamed at staff to shut that girl up. Riley walked in from the kitchen holding a mug, her hair wet from the rain, and paused when she saw Madison. Her eyes flicked to the tension in Madison's posture, the way her nails dug into her palm. Are you afraid of thunder? Madison shook her head automatically. No, thunder cracked violently overhead. She flinched. Riley didn't push. She just walked over, set the mug gently on the table beside Madison, and sat down on the other end of the couch. A respectful distance. Still, Madison felt the warmth of her presence. It's chamomile, Riley said. You look like you haven't slept in a while. Madison stared at the cup. Do you always try to fix things? Riley gave a soft, almost amused sigh. Only when I can't ignore them. A pause. You don't have to drink it. Just thought you might want to feel held, even if it's by a mug. That was ridiculous. And yet, Madison found her fingers curling around the ceramic before she even realized it. The warmth seeped into her skin like something dangerous. She didn't say thank you. Riley didn't expect it. She just leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the storm rage. Later that night, Madison found herself lingering at Riley's door. She didn't knock, just stood there, listening to the faint sound of music through the wall. Not classical, not the cold, distant pieces Madison had been trained to appreciate. This was softer, raw, acoustic guitar, maybe. A woman's voice. Gentle, honest. She didn't recognize the song, but it made her chest ache. The next morning, she made coffee.
Badly.
She had never done it before. Riley walked in wearing sweatpants and a loose hoodie, hair messy, eyes still sleepy. She blinked at the overflowing mug and the puddle forming beneath it. Are you trying to poison me or seduce me? She asked dryly. Madison flushed. I was trying to say thank you. Riley raised an eyebrow but didn't mock her. She cleaned up the mess silently and took a cautious sip. Terrible, she confirmed. But I appreciate the effort. And then she smiled. Not a smirk. Not sarcasm. A real, fleeting, crooked smile that made something sharp and unfamiliar bloom in Madison's chest. The next day, they had their first public event together, a gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Their appearance had been planned weeks in advance. Madison's mother had chosen the designer dresses, approved the talking points, and sent 3 separate stylists to make sure Madison looked like a vision of composure. Riley showed up 10 minutes before they were due to leave, wearing a black suit with subtle embroidery on the cuffs and her hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. She looked like someone out of a Vogue spread. Madison hated how good she looked, and how it made her feel. On the car ride over, silence stretched again, but not the same kind. This one was laced with something quieter, deeper. Something neither of them named. "Are you nervous?" Riley asked finally, without looking at her. Madison hesitated. "I'm used to being watched. Doesn't mean it hurts any less." That caught her off guard. Madison turned her head. "Why are you like this?" "Like what?" "Kind when you don't have to be. When you said we didn't have to pretend." Riley smiled, but there was something tired in it. "I said we don't have to pretend. I didn't say I don't care." Madison looked away. Her throat felt tight again. At the gala, Madison played her role flawlessly. She smiled. She posed. She gave empty compliments to people who didn't care about her name, only her status. Riley, to Madison's shock, held her hand during most of it, not possessively, not performatively.
Just there. Steady.
Grounding. Once, during a particularly sharp comment from a woman in pearls about how brave they were for entering such an unconventional marriage, Madison's grip had tightened, and Riley had cut in smoothly, voice like velvet over a knife. "Madison's bravery isn't in marrying me. It's in surviving you." The woman had blinked, stunned. Madison almost laughed. She didn't, but her heart swelled in a way that terrified her. That night, back in the penthouse, Madison opened a bottle of wine. "You didn't have to defend me like that," she said. Riley shrugged, slipping off her jacket. "You're not a porcelain doll. But I won't let them crack you open just to see if you bleed. You barely know me." And yet, she stepped closer, close enough to reach for the glass Madison held, but didn't. "I see you. More than they ever have." The space between them pulsed. Madison's breath hitched. Riley didn't move, didn't touch her, just let the moment hang between them like a match held too long. Then she stepped back. "Good night, Madison." Madison didn't sleep that night. Madison didn't mean to start watching her. But somewhere between Riley's silent defense at the Met Gala and the echo of her words, "I see you," Madison began to notice things. The way Riley cracked her knuckles when she was nervous, but pretended she wasn't. The way she always took the mug with the smallest chip in it. How she waited for Madison to start a conversation instead of pushing one. How she never complained, not even when their lives were dictated by social calendars and media interviews and the constant hum of cameras around their building. Madison had assumed Riley would rebel against all of it. But instead, she adapted. Quietly. Not for the world, but for her. That was the part Madison couldn't understand. Or maybe didn't want to. It was on a Wednesday morning that something shifted. Madison had just finished a photo shoot for Harper Biolabs, wearing a sleek navy suit and a cold expression meant to communicate power and legacy. She hated it. She hated how they posed her like a sculpture and told her not to blink, so she wouldn't look soft. Riley had offered to come, but Madison said no. She hadn't wanted anyone to see her like that, frozen, ornamental, hollow. When she got home, makeup still caked on her face, hair pulled back too tight, Riley was in the kitchen, barefoot, chopping onions with her sleeves rolled up and earbuds in. Madison stood there, watching her from the hallway. Watching the way Riley moved, unbothered, relaxed, completely unaware of the chaos that clung to Madison's skin like ash. Riley looked up, pulled one earbud out. "Hey," she said, nodding toward the cutting board. "I'm experimenting. Don't get excited, it could be poison." Madison didn't respond, didn't laugh. She walked to the counter, grabbed the edge with both hands and whispered, "I hated every second of it." Riley's hand stilled. The onion knife stopped midair. "Of the shoot?" Madison nodded. Her voice broke. "They didn't want me to look alive. Just perfect." Riley wiped her hands and turned to face her. "You don't owe them your soul just because they gave you a last name." Madison's lip trembled. "You don't know what it's like. Then tell me." And she did. She told Riley about her childhood, about the ballet classes she was forced into, the diets at age 9, the PR grooming at 12, about how her mother cried the first time she said she didn't want to go into pharmaceuticals. How she wasn't even allowed to come out because if she did, it would cause investor instability. Riley didn't interrupt. She just listened, arms crossed, face unreadable but open. When Madison finished, she was crying quietly and trembling. She hated crying in front of anyone. But Riley stepped closer, held out her hand, not to touch, just to offer, and said, "You're allowed to hate what they did to you. You're allowed to grieve the girl they never let you be." That broke something in her. She reached for Riley's hand, and Riley let her hold it. They stood like that for a long time,
Just breathing.
that night, they cooked together. Riley burned the onions. Madison oversalted the pasta. They laughed. For real. Riley poured wine, and they sat on the floor of the kitchen eating from mismatched bowls. It felt good. Unnatural, but good. Like something foreign being stitched into a life that had always been too tight. 3 days later, Madison came home from a board meeting with a splitting headache and an ego bruised from having her ideas dismissed by men who smiled too much. Riley wasn't home, but on the counter, there was a note. Saw the board meeting on live stream. You didn't just survive it, you crushed it. You looked like you wanted to stab them. Proud of you. Pizza in the fridge. R. Madison read it 3 times. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. But she sat down at the kitchen island, took a bite of cold pizza, and for the first time in what felt like years, she didn't feel like a ghost. That weekend, they were invited to a dinner party hosted by a senator's wife. Madison almost declined. But Riley said, "We don't have to go as them. We can go as us. Whatever that means right now." Madison wore black silk. Riley wore navy with no tie, hair loose around her shoulders. They didn't arrive holding hands. But Riley placed her hand gently on the small of Madison's back when the photographers swarmed, and Madison let her. Inside, the evening was everything Madison expected. Artificial, political, charged with invisible warfare. But Riley made it bearable. She whispered jokes in Madison's ear, deflected attention when Madison tensed, even danced with her once, when the senator insisted on a moment for the power couple. It was supposed to be for show, but Riley's hand was warm in hers, her palm steady at Madison's waist. Their eyes met for a second too long. Something unspoken passed between them. Neither of them smiled, but neither looked away. In the car, Madison stared out the window, heart racing. "I felt something," she whispered. Riley didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Me too." They didn't speak the rest of the way home. But that night, Riley didn't go to her room. She knocked on Madison's door. Just once. And when Madison opened it, still in her silk dress, hair down, lips parted in confusion, Riley said only one thing. "You don't have to be alone tonight." Madison stepped aside. Riley entered. She didn't touch her, didn't kiss her, just sat beside her on the edge of the bed while Madison leaned into her shoulder, eyes closed, walls cracking. It wasn't love yet, but it wasn't nothing. And that terrified Madison more than anything. The night Riley stayed in Madison's room, nothing happened. Not in the physical sense, but something shifted, subtly, undeniably. Madison fell asleep with her head against Riley's shoulder, the slow rhythm of the other woman's breathing anchoring her in a way she hadn't known she needed. When she woke, sometime before sunrise, Riley was still there, asleep upright against the headboard, one hand loosely resting over Madison's wrist like an unspoken promise. Madison didn't move. She watched her in the quiet, heart aching with something raw and unfamiliar. When Riley finally stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes, she didn't pull away. She just looked at Madison, sleepy and soft, and said, "Good morning," like it meant something. Madison said nothing, but she didn't let go of her hand either. For the rest of the week, nothing was spoken aloud about that night. They returned to their rhythm, parallel routines, shared spaces, casual proximity. But the silence between them no longer felt distant. It was weighted, electric. Madison found herself noticing things she shouldn't. How Riley smelled like cedar and cinnamon after her morning shower, how her laughter cracked when something actually made her laugh, how her mouth moved when she read silently on the couch. She hated how easily Riley could make her stomach twist with one glance. Hated more how much she craved those glances now. On Friday, their parents invited them for dinner. Madison had tried to protest, but appearances were still currency, and both families wanted updates on their successful union. Riley agreed only after confirming there'd be a car waiting at exactly 9 to take them home. "If I'm giving them 3 hours of my life, I'm not giving them a minute more," she said flatly. Madison didn't argue. Dinner was exactly what she expected. Suffocating. Her mother commented on Madison's recent glow. Her father asked about grandchildren in a tone that made her skin crawl, and Riley's parents acted like the merger had been a romantic victory rather than a business transaction. But what surprised Madison was Riley. Not because she was polite or composed, that much was expected, but because she was quietly, almost viciously protective. Every time her mother made a passive-aggressive remark, Riley would lean in closer to Madison, placing a hand on her lower back or brushing her arm in a subtle display of ownership that wasn't possessive, but defiant. Like she was claiming Madison not for herself, but from them. When Madison excused herself and stepped out into the hallway, heart pounding from her mother's latest jab about emotional fragility, Riley found her within minutes. "I'm fine," Madison said automatically. Riley didn't respond. She reached out and gently fixed the clasp of Madison's necklace that had twisted sideways. Her fingers lingered at her collarbone, warm, grounding. "You don't have to pretend with me," she said softly. Madison's breath hitched. "Why are you always so gentle with me?" "Because I know what it's like to be made of glass and expected to be steel." Madison closed her eyes. For a second, she thought Riley would kiss her. She didn't. But she didn't step away either. Back in the car, the air between them was charged, the silence thick with everything unsaid. Riley's hand rested near Madison's on the seat. Not touching, but close. Madison stared at it for a long time. She didn't move. When they arrived home, they didn't speak as they entered the penthouse. Madison poured herself a glass of wine. Riley opened the windows. The city lights flickered below them, and for a moment, everything else faded. "Do you ever think about what this could have been like if we'd met differently?" Madison asked. Riley glanced over. "All the time." Madison took a slow sip. "Would you have noticed me?" "I noticed you the second I walked into that engagement party," Riley said without hesitation. "Even before you saw me." Madison's chest tightened. "I hated you at first." "I know," Riley said. Then, quieter. "I hated what you represented. Not you." Madison laughed, soft and hollow. "I hated what I represented too." Riley walked over, took the glass from her hand, and set it down. Her eyes searched Madison's face, calm and unreadable. "We can rewrite this, you know. Not for them. For us." Madison swallowed hard.
How?
"Start with telling me what you want. Not what they want. You." Madison couldn't breathe. She could barely think. "I don't know what I want," she whispered. "That's okay," Riley murmured. "I can wait." And with that, she stepped back, gave her a faint smile, and disappeared into her room. Madison didn't sleep that night. Not because of doubt, but because her entire body was buzzing with the ache of something she'd never let herself feel before. Desire.
Hope.
Terror. The next morning, Riley made pancakes.
Badly.
Madison took one bite and nearly choked. Riley raised both eyebrows. "Okay, rude." Madison was laughing before she could stop herself. And it was real. For the first time in what felt like years, it was real. The rest of the day passed in strange warmth. Coffee on the balcony, music playing softly in the background, shared glances that lasted too long. That night, as Madison stood in front of her mirror brushing her hair, Riley appeared in the doorway. No words. Just her, in sweatpants and a tank top, hair damp from a shower, eyes soft but serious. Madison turned slowly. Riley didn't move. But the tension between them coiled like wire. Madison didn't ask what she was doing there. She didn't need to. Riley walked forward slowly, carefully, giving her time to stop it. Madison didn't. When Riley reached her, she raised one hand and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Madison's eyes fluttered shut. "You're not broken," Riley said. "You were just never allowed to be whole." Madison let out a shuddered breath. Then, when she opened her eyes, she said, "Stay." One word. One crack in the wall. Riley didn't answer. She just reached for Madison's hand, pulled her gently toward the bed, and they lay down, fully clothed, side by side, facing each other. Neither of them touched. Neither of them slept. They just listened to each other breathe.
Slowly, carefully.
Like they were building something sacred. Madison had no idea where this was going. But for the first time in her life, she wanted to find out. Something had changed. It was invisible, subtle, but undeniable. A thread pulled taut between them, humming quietly beneath every interaction. Madison felt it in the way Riley stood a little closer now, the way her gaze lingered a beat too long when Madison spoke, the way silence between them had softened into something intimate instead of awkward. It wasn't love.
Not yet.
But it wasn't pretend anymore either. And Madison didn't know how to stop wanting more. Every night Riley stayed in her room without crossing any physical line. The tension built like a pressure valve no one dared release. They would lie side by side, breathing in sync, their hands occasionally brushing in the dark, neither of them speaking of it. Madison would fall asleep to the sound of Riley's voice reading aloud from whatever book she'd brought to bed, and wake up to the warmth of her still there. It was unbearable in the most addictive way. Madison had never allowed herself to feel this close to anyone. Not emotionally. Not physically. She'd always viewed vulnerability as something dangerous, a tool people used to control or betray. But with Riley it was different. Terrifying, yes. But strangely safe. On a Tuesday afternoon, everything cracked. They were attending a fundraising luncheon for a local women's shelter, something Madison had volunteered for before, but this time, she brought Riley as her wife. The press was there, naturally, and the moment they stepped out of the car holding hands, the cameras exploded. Madison kept her chin high, her smile perfectly measured, but her grip on Riley's fingers was tight. Inside, they mingled, posed for photos, answered shallow questions about philanthropy and unity, but it wasn't until they sat down at their table that it happened. One of the donors, an older man in a navy suit and false charm, leaned across the table toward Madison with a smirk. "I must say, Madison, you've surprised us all. I never would have guessed you'd be comfortable with this arrangement." Madison stiffened. Riley glanced at the man, her expression unreadable. "This arrangement?" Madison repeated slowly. "You mean my marriage?" "Well, sure. I mean no offense," the man said, laughing like he'd made a clever joke. "But a woman like you marrying another woman? Just seems like such a dramatic pivot from what the Harpers usually represent." Madison opened her mouth, unsure if she was going to scream or cry or throw her wine in his face. But before she could speak, Riley reached out and placed her hand gently on Madison's thigh under the table. Not for show. For grounding. Then she turned to the man and said calmly, "A woman like her? What's that supposed to mean?" The man shrugged, smug. "You know."
Poised.
"Private. Not exactly waving a pride flag, if you get my drift." Riley leaned forward, her voice still soft but colder now. "A woman like Madison has spent her entire life being measured by men like you. Judged, controlled, silenced. She doesn't owe you visibility, comfort, or explanation. And for the record, she doesn't need to wave a flag to be proud. She married me, didn't she?" The man blinked, visibly taken aback. Madison's heart was thundering in her chest. She reached under the table and laced her fingers with Riley's, grateful and breathless. After the event, in the car, silence stretched between them again, but it was charged, hot, restless. Madison turned to her, voice low. "Thank you. For what you said back there." Riley shrugged, eyes still fixed on the passing city lights. "I meant it." "I know," Madison whispered. "That's what scares me." Riley looked at her then, really looked. "Why does it scare you?" "Because I want you to mean it," Madison said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't know what to do with that." They stared at each other. No one moved. When they got home, Madison didn't go to her room. She followed Riley into hers. Riley paused in the doorway, one hand on the frame. "Are you sure?" Madison nodded. "I don't want to be safe anymore. I want to be real." That night, they kissed for the first time. Slow, tentative, trembling. It wasn't fireworks. It was something quieter.
Deeper.
Like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years. Riley kissed her like she was something fragile, but also something precious. Madison responded like she was starving. They didn't sleep with each other. Not yet. But they touched. Explored. Mapped skin with reverent fingertips. Madison felt like her body was hers for the first time. No performance. No expectation. Just feeling. Just presence. Just Riley. The next morning, they lay tangled in bed, sheets twisted, sunlight slipping between curtains. Madison traced lazy circles on Riley's bare shoulder. "Does this change everything?" she asked. Riley smiled without opening her eyes.
No.
"It just makes it finally make sense." Madison closed her eyes and pressed her forehead to Riley's. "I'm scared." "Me too," Riley murmured. "But I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Madison believed her. Not because Riley promised, but because every action, every look, every word until now had built a foundation stronger than any vow. That afternoon, the news broke. Photos of them holding hands. Of Madison smiling. Of Riley's protective body language. Headlines exploded with speculation. Real love or smart branding? The heiress and the hacker. An unlikely power couple. Are Madison Harper and Riley Chin more than a business deal? Madison's phone buzzed endlessly. Her parents called 3 times. She didn't answer. She sat on the floor of the living room, staring at the screen, anxiety pressing down on her chest like a vice. Riley sat beside her, took the phone gently, and turned it face down. "Let them talk," she said. "They will anyway. But only we get to decide what's real." Madison's eyes filled with tears. "What if I'm not ready to face them?"
Then you don't, Riley said.
"Not until you want to. Not until you say it's time." That night, Madison posted one photo to her personal social media account. No caption. Just her hand wrapped around Riley's on the rooftop, city lights blurring behind them. The comments exploded in minutes. But Madison didn't look at them. She was too busy watching Riley walk barefoot across the penthouse, humming softly to herself, absolutely unaware that Madison had just done the bravest thing she'd ever done in her life. Chosen her. In public. Without permission. Without apology. There was no going back. Not after that photo. Not after the way Riley had kissed her in the quiet of their shared world and made Madison feel like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a mistake or a strategy or a performance, but something real and terrifying and electric. The world responded exactly as expected, with noise. Her phone became a battlefield of PR alerts, missed calls from her parents, emails from the board at Harper Biolabs subtly reminding her of image sensitivity and reputation impact. Articles dissected their every movement, how close they stood, how often they touched, whether Riley's smile in one frame meant more than professionalism. They called it a rebranding, a risk, a rebellion. Madison sat on the edge of the bed, phone buzzing constantly on the nightstand, while Riley stood by the window in an oversized t-shirt, sipping coffee like none of it mattered. "You're calm," Madison muttered, staring at the screen. "You're not." "They're going to destroy me," she whispered. Riley walked over, took the phone, and tossed it onto the bed like it was harmless. "No, they're not. Because I won't let them. You can't protect me from the entire world." "Maybe not," Riley said, crouching down in front of her. "But I can remind you that they don't get to define who you are. You do. And if you want to disappear for a week and shut it all out, I'll pack the bags. If you want to go public, give interviews, take control of the narrative, I'll stand beside you and smile like hell. But if you want to breathe, just breathe. I'll build the silence around you myself." Madison's throat tightened. "Why do you care so much?" Riley didn't blink. "Because I see you. And I'm tired of watching you drown just to make other people comfortable. Madison looked away. Not because she didn't believe her, but because she did. And that was the most terrifying part. That afternoon, her mother showed up at the penthouse. Without calling, without warning. She walked in like she still owned Madison's life, her heels clicking across the floor like accusations. "You need to take the photo down," she said without preamble. "You need to stop pretending this marriage is more than what it is. The damage control is still possible if you act now." Riley stood behind the kitchen island, arms crossed, silent. Watching. Madison took a slow breath. "It's not pretending." Her mother scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. This was a business deal. You knew that." "I knew what you wanted it to be," Madison said, standing straighter. "But it turns out I get a say, too. You've always been impulsive. Emotional. This is exactly why we never let you." "Let me what?" Madison cut in, her voice rising. "Live? Feel? Choose." Her mother's mouth flattened into a line. "You're humiliating yourself." Riley stepped forward then, calm but firm. "With all due respect, Mrs. Harper, Madison doesn't need your permission to be whole." Her mother turned on her. Cold eyes narrowed. "And you, this entire thing is your fault. You've seduced her into thinking she can abandon everything she was raised for." "I didn't seduce her," Riley said. "I just didn't lie to her." Madison watched them, her chest rising and falling in shallow, furious breaths. Then she said quietly, "You can leave now." Her mother froze.
"What?"
"You heard me. Madison, don't be foolish. You think she'll still be here when the press turns cruel? When the board pulls their support? When you've burned every bridge you have?" Madison looked at Riley. Riley didn't flinch, didn't look away, just reached for Madison's hand and held it tightly. "Yes," Madison said. "I do." Her mother stared at them like she didn't recognize her daughter. Then she turned and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut. Silence fell. Madison collapsed into Riley's arms. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her whole body trembled. "She's going to make my life hell," she whispered. "I know," Riley said, holding her close. "But you're not alone in it anymore." That night, Riley drew her a bath, lit candles, played music. She didn't ask questions, didn't give advice, just sat on the bathroom floor, back against the wall, while Madison sank into the water and exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. "I feel like I'm unraveling," Madison whispered, staring at the flickering flame of a candle. "Then let it unravel," Riley said softly, "and we'll stitch something new from what's real." "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," Riley said, "but it's worth it." Later, in bed, Madison curled into her side, face buried against her neck. "I don't know how to be this brave every day." Riley's voice was quiet. "Then I'll be brave enough for both of us until you catch up." The next morning, a letter arrived from Harper Biolabs. Official stationery. Language sharp and corporate. A gentle but clear suggestion that Madison's public image had become complicated and that continued board support would require strategic alignment. Translation: fall back in line or fall out of favor. Madison read it 3 times. Then she put it down, walked to the kitchen, and poured herself a cup of coffee. Riley watched her silently. "Well," she asked. Madison took a sip. "They can shove their alignment." Riley smirked. "Now that's the woman I married." They laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in what felt like forever. But the day wasn't over. That afternoon, Madison received an invitation to speak at a panel about women in leadership. At first, she almost declined. The attention, the questions, the pressure. But then she saw Riley watching her, calm and patient, waiting for her to decide. And Madison said yes. The event was televised. A room full of CEOs, executives, journalists. Madison wore a white pantsuit and heels that made her feel 10 feet tall. Riley was in the audience, dressed in black, arms crossed, eyes locked on her like a silent promise. When the moderator asked about the photo, the rumors, the reality of her marriage, Madison didn't flinch. It started as an arrangement, she said. But what it became was mine. And I won't apologize for loving someone who makes me feel safe in my own skin for the first time in my life. The room went quiet. Then someone clapped. Then others. Riley didn't clap. She stood up. And Madison smiled at her like she finally knew who she was becoming. The moment the interview aired, the world shifted. Madison's face, her words, her voice, declaring love on live television in a calm, unwavering tone, spread faster than anyone could control. Screenshots flooded social media. Commentators dissected her phrasing. Headlines ranged from celebratory to scandalized. Heiress defies family for love. Madison Harper declares same-sex marriage no longer a business deal. Revolution or recklessness? But none of that noise touched Madison when she walked off that stage and saw Riley standing near the exit, arms folded, eyes wide with something between shock and pride.
She didn't speak.
She just walked straight to Riley and wrapped her arms around her, burying her face into her neck, letting the tension melt for one brief second. Riley's hands found her back instantly, firm and warm. "You said it," she whispered into her hair. "You really said it." "I meant it," Madison breathed. "I still do." They left the venue hand in hand, ignoring the flashes of cameras and the shouted questions from reporters. But back at the penthouse, reality returned like cold water. Her inbox was overflowing with statements from Harper Biolab's legal, HR, and media advisors. Her father had left a voicemail, calm but clipped. "We'll discuss your position at the next board meeting." Her mother didn't bother with calls. Just sent a simple text. "You've made your choice. Don't expect rescue." Madison stared at the words until they blurred. Then she deleted them. Riley took her hand, laced their fingers, and said, "We're not looking for rescue. We're building something from the ashes." That night, for the first time, they slept in the same bed with no walls left between them. No pretense. No fear. They made love slowly, deliberately, as if trying to memorize each other in case the world burned everything down the next day. Madison cried halfway through. Not from pain.
From release.
Riley didn't ask why. She just kissed her until her breath evened out and the shaking stopped. When morning came, they didn't speak about it. They didn't need to. But outside their quiet world, things were shifting. The board at Harper Biolabs was splitting down the middle. Half argued Madison's publicity had humanized the company. The other half saw her as a liability. She was excluded from 3 meetings without explanation. Riley noticed the change first. "They're freezing you out," she said one morning, sliding a tablet across the breakfast table. "Your name isn't on the new initiative. You were supposed to co-chair that." Madison stared at the document. Her name, absent. Replaced. "They're testing how far they can push," she murmured. Riley leaned forward. "Push back." But Madison hesitated. If she fought, they'd paint her as emotional. If she didn't, they'd erase her completely.
There was no safe path.
Only fire. That night, she sat alone in the balcony, legs pulled to her chest, hair in a loose braid. Riley came out quietly, sat beside her, handed her a glass of wine. "You don't have to be polite about this," she said. "It's okay to be angry." Madison sipped slowly. "I've spent so much of my life being calm."
Contained.
Controlled. "I don't even know how to be angry properly." "Then let me teach you," Riley said. "Start with one truth you've never said out loud." Madison took a long breath. "I hate how much of myself I gave up just to be acceptable." Riley nodded. "Say another." "I hate that my parents never loved me. Just the version of me they built." Another. Madison's voice broke. "I hate that sometimes I still want their approval." Riley took her hand, squeezing it. "That's not weakness. That's survival. And you don't owe them anything now." Madison looked at her. "What if I burn everything down and there's nothing left?" "Then I'll be there, holding the match," Riley whispered. "And we'll build something better from the ashes." Madison kissed her then. Harder than before. Not from fear.
From choice.
The next day, she walked into Harper Biolab's headquarters unannounced. Straight-backed. Chin high. wearing a tailored black suit that made every step echo like thunder. She interrupted a board meeting mid-discussion. The room froze. "I may not have been invited," she said, voice calm and sharp, "but let me make something very clear. I am not going anywhere. You can strip my name from slides. You can whisper behind closed doors. But this company still has my blood in its veins, and I will not be erased to soothe the egos of men threatened by visibility." No one spoke. She let the silence stretch. "If anyone here wants me gone, say it to my face. Otherwise, get out of my way." She walked out without waiting for a response. Her phone buzzed before she reached the elevator. One text from Riley. "Proud of you. Always." But the backlash didn't stop. That night, a news story broke. An anonymous source claiming Madison had weaponized her sexuality to distract from internal mismanagement. Madison read it in silence, jaw locked, hands trembling. Riley saw her expression and took the phone, read it slowly, then threw it across the room with a force that startled even herself. "They're trying to destroy you," she hissed. "No," Madison said, rising to her feet. "They're trying to scare me. There's a difference." But she didn't sleep that night. Neither did Riley. They sat up in bed, backs against the headboard, knees touching. "This isn't just about us anymore," Madison said. "This is about every girl who's ever been told to sit down and smile." "Then we don't stop," Riley said. "We push harder. We speak louder."
We.
Madison asked. Riley turned her head. "You think I'd let you fight this alone?" Madison looked down at their hands, fingers laced. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." Riley smiled, kissed her knuckles. "You didn't do anything. You just let yourself be seen. That was enough." Outside, the city pulsed with light and judgment and noise. But inside their shared space, there was something unshakable forming. Not just love. Not just survival. Something bigger. Something louder than silence. Something that refused to hide anymore. The week after the smear article was the hardest of Madison's life. Every time she opened her phone, another headline screamed accusations. Phrases like calculated rebellion, sexual manipulation, and unfit for leadership rotated through the news cycle like poison on repeat. Even the reputable outlets, ones that had previously called her a rising star, began to use phrases like controversial figure and reckless heiress. Riley told her not to read them. Madison pretended not to. But at night, when the lights were off and Riley's breathing had settled into that slow rhythm beside her, she would scroll through the venom in the dark, each word another thorn under her skin. The board remained quiet, but their silence was strategy, not mercy. Legal sent her a revised contract, stripped of power, laced with condescension. She didn't sign it. Not because she believed they wouldn't force her out, but because she was done pretending to be obedient just to earn a seat she'd already bled for. Still, the pressure clawed at her confidence, at her worth. She stopped going out, stopped checking her email, canceled a radio interview that Riley had encouraged her to accept. One morning, she stood in front of the mirror with her toothbrush in hand and didn't recognize her own eyes. Hollow.
Dull.
Afraid. Riley found her like that. In the bathroom, still wearing her robe, hands frozen at the sink. "You didn't sleep," she said quietly. Madison shook her head. "I can't stop hearing them. I hear their voices in my head every time I close my eyes." Riley stepped forward and took the toothbrush from her hand. "Then let me say something louder." Madison didn't speak. Riley cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet her eyes. "You are not weak for being hurt. You are not dramatic for being angry. And you are not alone just because you're afraid." "I feel like I'm vanishing," Madison whispered. "You're not," Riley said. "You're being peeled down to something honest. And when the surface breaks, that's when the fire gets out. And what if all that's left under the surface is ash?" "Then I'll love your ashes too," Riley said, voice unwavering. And just like that, the fear cracked. A little. That night, Riley didn't just hold her. She laid Madison down with a tenderness that felt like worship, and for the first time, Madison didn't just receive love. She let it in. Completely. Openly. With all the broken pieces. The next day, things got worse. A video leaked. A private boardroom clip, taken months ago, of Madison expressing doubt about a merger proposal. The clip was edited out of context to make her seem incompetent. It went viral within hours. Riley found her in the guest room, sitting on the floor with her knees to her chest. Madison didn't cry. She just looked at Riley and said, "They're going to win." Riley sat down beside her.
No.
They're not. They have power. So do you. They have control. You have truth. Madison shook her head. That's not enough anymore. Then we make it enough, Riley said. We go public. All the way. We stop letting them frame the narrative. What are you saying? I'm saying we do an interview. Together. Not some polished PR stunt.
A real one. Raw. Honest.
You tell your story. I tell mine. We tell ours. Madison stared at her. That would set everything on fire. Then we light the match together. Madison hesitated. She'd spent a lifetime being coached to say the right thing, wear the right dress, give the right smile. And Riley was asking her to tear all of that down in front of the world. You really think people will care about the truth? She asked. Riley's answer was immediate.
No.
But they'll feel it. That was enough. They contacted a journalist Riley trusted, someone independent, someone brave. The interview was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, Madison felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff with no safety net. But Riley was beside her the entire time. She helped her choose clothes that felt like her instead of an image. She rehearsed questions, not with scripted answers, but with practice and honesty. She held Madison when she panicked, grounded her when she spiraled, made her laugh when nothing felt funny. On the morning of the interview, Madison looked at herself in the mirror and didn't see fear.
She saw fight.
And when Riley took her hand as they walked into the studio, she didn't feel alone. The interviewer began gently, but didn't hold back. There's been a lot of speculation about the nature of your marriage, he said. What do you say to people who believe this was never real? Madison met his gaze without flinching. They're right about one thing. It wasn't real, at first. It was arranged. It was strategic. But what happened after that was something none of us could plan. And what had happened? Madison looked at Riley. Riley looked back. Madison turned to the camera. I fell in love with someone who refused to let me feel unloved, even when I didn't know how to accept it. The rest of the interview was a blur of emotion, talking about their pasts, their fears, the silent ways love had grown between them. Riley spoke of watching Madison break and how beautiful it had been to watch her rebuild. Madison spoke of finally seeing herself through Riley's eyes and liking who she saw. By the end, there were tears. From them. From the interviewer. From the studio crew. And when it aired that night, the world paused. Not everyone believed them. Not everyone supported them. But something shifted. They weren't a rumor anymore. They were real. That night, the penthouse felt different. Warmer. Calmer. Madison curled into Riley on the couch, head on her chest. Do you think we've done enough? She whispered. No, Riley said. But we've started something. And maybe that's the bravest thing we could do. Madison closed her eyes. And for the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. The interview changed everything. Not instantly. Not dramatically. But like a tide that started to rise. Slow, steady, unstoppable. Within hours, the video had millions of views. Not just clicks. Views. Watched, shared, clipped, and replayed. Headlines, once cruel and speculative, softened their tone. Raw and unfiltered, Madison Harper and Riley Chin speak out. From arrangement to affection, the truth behind the marriage. Vulnerability, visibility, and the fight to be seen. But more than media traction, something deeper began to happen. Messages flooded in from strangers, from old friends, from people Madison had never met. Queer women thanking them for showing that survival can become love. Young girls writing that they no longer felt alone. Even former colleagues, once silent in boardrooms, quietly messaged their support. Madison sat on the couch reading them, one by one, her hand shaking. "They're real," she whispered, passing the phone to Riley. "They see us." Riley scrolled through the comments, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, small, private, proud.
"Yeah," she said.
"They really do." But it wasn't just validation that the interview brought. It was also power. Madison received an invitation to keynote a conference about equity in corporate leadership, something she'd never been offered before. Harper Biolabs couldn't ignore the growing support. They released a generic public statement about honoring personal journeys and recognizing leadership in all forms.
It was weak.
But it was a retreat. And in this war, that was a victory. Madison didn't celebrate with champagne or lavish dinners. She celebrated in quiet ways. Long walks with Riley, hand in hand through neighborhoods that no longer felt like cages. Afternoons reading on the balcony, cooking badly, and laughing hard. She stopped hiding. Riley noticed the shift first. "You're smiling more," she said one night, brushing a curl behind Madison's ear. "Not for show. Just because." Madison leaned into the touch. "Because I finally feel like I'm not holding my breath every second of the day." That night, Madison woke from a nightmare, an old one, the kind where she's standing in front of a crowd and her voice disappears. She sat up in bed, gasping, sweating, heart pounding like it was trying to escape her chest. Riley was awake in seconds. "What is it? What happened?" "I was voiceless again," Madison whispered. "Like before. Like always." Riley pulled her into her arms. "You're not voiceless anymore," she said firmly. "You're the one changing the conversation now." Madison clung to her. "Why does that scare me more than being silent ever did?" Riley kissed her forehead. "Because it means you matter. And when we matter, people try harder to silence us." The next morning, they were invited to speak at a university event focused on visibility and love beyond conventions. They hesitated. It felt intimate, different from the televised interview. But eventually they said yes. The auditorium was packed. Mostly young people. Students. Queer kids who looked at them not like celebrities, but like survivors. Madison's throat tightened when she saw them. Riley noticed. "You don't have to speak if you're not ready," she whispered. Madison shook her head. "I want to." And when she stood, hands trembling, voice soft but steady, she said, "I was taught that love was something that came after approval, after perfection, that I had to earn it, control it, dress it up in silence and obedience. But then I met someone who didn't want my performance, only my truth." She looked at Riley. "And I learned that real love doesn't arrive like lightning. Sometimes it grows in the quiet between two people who were never supposed to belong to each other. And then it stays." When they finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. But what Madison remembered most was a girl in the front row, maybe 19, with a pride pin on her backpack and tears in her eyes. She mouthed "thank you" as they stepped down. Backstage, Madison collapsed into Riley's arms. "Every time I think I'm empty, I find something left to give." Riley smiled against her hair. "That's what makes you powerful." In the days that followed, Madison's father reached out. Not to threaten, not to shame, but to ask for a meeting. Madison hesitated. "What if he just wants to manipulate me again?"
"Then you walk out," Riley said.
"But you'll do it standing tall this time." They met in a quiet cafe downtown. Her father looked older, tired. He didn't hug her, just nodded and gestured for her to sit. For a long time, neither spoke. Then he said, "You're not the woman I raised." Madison met his gaze.
"No.
"I'm the woman I became when I stopped needing to be who you wanted." "You've lost us a lot of support," he said. "And I may never understand this." "I don't need you to understand," Madison said calmly. "I just need you to stop standing in the way." He studied her. "And if I can't," Madison rose, "then you'll be watching from the sidelines while I build something without you." She walked out, heart pounding, lungs tight, but freer than she'd ever felt. That night, she told Riley everything. Riley listened, silent but present, then kissed her like it was a promise. "Every time you choose yourself," she whispered, You make me fall for you all over again. Madison's breath caught. Do you ever regret being forced into this? Riley shook her head. Not for a second. Because they forced us into a contract, but we chose the rest. Every kiss. Every fight. Every risk. Even when it hurt? Especially then, Riley said. Because pain taught us how to love for real. Madison didn't reply. She just reached for her hand and held it until sleep came. Peaceful.
Real.
Earned. It wasn't about them anymore. Somewhere between surviving the smear campaigns, facing their families, and choosing each other over and over again, Madison and Riley had become something more than a marriage. They had become a movement, not because they tried to,
Not because they wanted the spotlight,
but because the world kept watching, and what it saw was a story that refused to stay quiet. The university's speech went viral. Clips of Madison's voice shaking as she spoke about love, identity, and freedom were stitched across TikTok, quoted in articles, played in classrooms.
there were murals now.
In 2 cities. One in Boston, one in San Francisco. Both featured the same image, a silhouette of 2 women, side by side, hands intertwined, facing the skyline. Someone tagged it with a phrase from the interview. She didn't let me feel unloved. Madison saw it for the first time from the back of a car, rolling past a concrete wall transformed by color and courage.
She didn't speak.
Just reached for Riley's hand and held it until the mural disappeared behind them. They're not painting us, Riley said quietly that night, when Madison sat on the floor of their bedroom staring at the photo she'd taken of the wall. They're painting what they see in themselves. We just gave it a name. Madison nodded slowly. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. No, Riley said. But maybe that's why it did. Because it was never about selling a story. It was about surviving it. But the more they became symbols, the more their lives stopped belonging solely to them. Madison couldn't walk into a cafe without someone whispering. Couldn't post a photo without thousands of interpretations. Even the apartment started to feel less like a home and more like a stage. The pressure, once external, began to seep into the quiet spaces between them. One night, after a long event, Madison stood in front of the mirror pulling out bobby pins with shaking fingers. Riley stepped behind her, wrapped her arms around her waist. Tired? She asked. Madison nodded. But the word that formed in her throat was heavier than fatigue. Empty. Riley froze. Empty how? Madison met her eyes in the mirror. Like I keep giving, and I don't know if there's anything left that belongs just to me. Riley stepped back. Not in rejection. In understanding.
We can disappear, she said. Tonight.
No press. No events. Just us. And if that makes people think we're hiding, then let them think what they want, Riley said. They've done it before. But you matter more than their headlines. They packed a single bag, left a note with their assistant, and vanished into a small house Riley owned on the coast of Maine, one she hadn't visited in years. It was isolated, nestled in pine trees and fog, with creaking floors and no signal. The first night, they didn't speak much, just existed beside each other. Madison lit candles. Riley cooked. They ate on the floor with the sound of waves in the distance. It wasn't romantic. It was necessary. Madison slept for 12 hours straight. Riley didn't wake her. When she finally opened her eyes the next morning, light streaming across her face, she realized she hadn't dreamed, hadn't worried all night. She found Riley outside, barefoot in the grass, staring out at the ocean. Madison wrapped her arms around her from behind and said, "You always know when I'm about to break." Riley leaned back into her. "Because I've lived in pieces too." They stayed for 4 days. No makeup, no meetings, no media. Just food, books, firewood, long walks, and slow kisses. The kind of intimacy that didn't need proving. On the 3rd night, they lay in bed, tangled under a blanket, the room lit only by the flickering fire. Madison traced a finger over Riley's collarbone. "If I hadn't fallen in love with you," she whispered, "do you think we'd still be surviving all of this?" "Maybe," Riley said. "But it wouldn't have mattered. Because we'd still be pretending." And now, Now, Riley said, voice low, everything matters. Every choice, every breath, every time you speak, you change something. Even when it's small? Especially then. On the fifth day, they returned. Madison was ready. Not because the world had changed, but because she had. She walked into Harper Biolab's headquarters without fear. The board had called an emergency vote. She knew what it meant. Knew they were trying to push her out. But she wasn't the girl who once sat silent while they ignored her voice. She wore white. No jewelry. No makeup. Just clarity. Riley was waiting in the lobby, eyes locked on her as she stepped into the elevator.
She didn't need to follow.
Madison didn't need armor anymore. The meeting was brutal. Condescension masked as concern. Polite threats. Smiles with knives beneath them. They called it protecting the brand. Madison called it cowardice. This company was built on control, she said, standing before the table. But the future is built on truth. If you want a puppet, fire me. But if you want a legacy that actually reflects the world as it is, you'll let me do what I was born to do. Silence. Then a vote. 6-5. She stayed. When she walked out, Riley was there. Madison didn't say anything. Just fell into her arms and whispered, "They almost won." Riley held her tighter. But they didn't. That night, they sat on the rooftop of their building, legs dangling over the edge, pizza box between them. "You know what scares me most?" Madison asked, chewing thoughtfully. "That I've spent so long fighting to be heard, I don't know how to live quietly anymore." Riley bumped her shoulder. "Then maybe we build a life that's a little bit loud, a little bit messy, but completely ours." Madison looked at her. "I think I'd like that." "Then it's settled," Riley said. "Let the world keep watching. We'll give them something beautiful to see." Madison always thought that the end of a battle would feel like silence, like calm, like peace. But in the weeks after the board vote, she discovered that surviving didn't mean resting. It meant rebuilding. And rebuilding was its own kind of storm. With her seat secured and her voice no longer muted, Madison took the reins of Harper Biolabs in a way that no one, not even she, had expected. She restructured outdated leadership models, shifted corporate resources toward inclusive health initiatives, and brought in young professionals who actually looked like the world they were trying to serve. But progress had a cost. Investors pushed back. Shareholders called emergency meetings. Journalists wrote op-eds asking if Love had compromised her leadership. It never ended. And still, every morning, Riley placed a cup of coffee on the nightstand, kissed her temple, and whispered, "You've already survived worse. Today you build." Madison would take the cup, sip, and smile because it was true. But something inside her had shifted again. A tension. Not between her and Riley, never that, but between who she had been, who she was becoming, and the image everyone else now projected onto her. Hero. Symbol. Rebel. Madison didn't feel like any of those things. She felt like a woman who had clawed her way into her own skin and was still figuring out how to live in it. One afternoon, while prepping for a panel on queer representation in healthcare, she stared at her reflection in the green room mirror and whispered, "I don't know who they think I am anymore." Riley, seated behind her, looked up from her phone. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I didn't ask to be a role model.
Or a flag.
Or a fight." "You didn't ask," Riley said gently. "But you answered. What if I get it wrong? Then you learn. And you keep answering anyway." Madison turned slowly. "And what if I'm tired of being brave? Then be tired. I'll be brave enough for both of us until you're ready again. Like I promised." Madison looked at her, and something behind her ribs softened. Riley wasn't just her wife anymore. She was her home. That night, they went out for dinner, something simple. A corner table at a quiet Italian place with string lights and an old piano in the back. No press. No expectations. Just them. Madison wore no makeup. Riley wore an old leather jacket. They held hands across the table like teenagers, laughing too loud, drinking too much wine, stealing kisses like they were ordinary people in an ordinary world. For 2 hours, the weight of everything disappeared. Until it didn't. Because outside, as they walked toward their car, a man was waiting. Late 40s. Expensive shoes. Familiar face. A minor investor Madison had met once at a gala. His smile was cold. His words colder. Well, if it isn't the corporate princess and her watchdog. Riley immediately stepped between them, but Madison touched her arm gently. Don't. You know, the man continued, you've done quite a job dividing people. Splitting investors. Shaking things up. And for what? A personal crusade disguised as policy? Madison didn't flinch. For integrity. For attention, he snapped. You think love makes you bulletproof? It doesn't. It makes you predictable. Weak. Riley stepped forward. Say one more word, and I swear to God. No, Madison interrupted, voice calm. Let him finish. Let him speak every bitter, outdated word so I can look him in the eye and remind him that I've already outlived the system he worships. She turned to the man. Your time is ending. Mine is just beginning. And whether you like it or not, women like me are the future of this industry. Get used to it. His smile faltered. He stepped back. And then he left. Madison's hands were shaking as she unlocked the car. Riley opened the door for her without a word. Once inside, Madison let out a long, trembling breath. He scared me, she admitted. I hate that. You were brilliant, Riley said softly. You stood your ground, because I've seen you do it 100 times. Madison. Riley turned to her. You don't need me as a shield anymore. You are the storm now. And Madison believed her. But the fear still lingered. Not just for herself, but for what came next. Because with visibility came responsibility. And with responsibility came exposure. That weekend, Madison was invited to appear on a major televised roundtable with other women CEOs and LGBTQ+ leaders. She was hesitant, exhausted. But she went. Riley stayed backstage. Madison sat beside lawyers and authors and tech giants, all talking about disruption, power, resistance. And when it was her turn to speak, she looked into the camera and said, I never set out to be brave. I only set out to be honest. But in a world that punishes honesty, maybe that is a kind of courage. After the show, Riley found her in the dressing room, unzipping her boots. You're getting really good at this, she said. At what? Being seen. And staying soft. Madison smiled. It's easier when you're watching. But later that night, as they lay in bed, Madison turned to her and whispered, Doesn't it scare you? That the more real we are, the more they want to ruin it. Every day, Riley said. But I'd rather be hated for loving you out loud than loved for hiding it. Madison didn't reply. She just kissed her, slow, aching, full of everything words couldn't hold. The next morning, Madison received an email from an LGBTQ+ nonprofit asking if she'd consider becoming a mentor for young queer professionals. She stared at it for a long time, then clicked reply. Yes. That night, she told Riley. I think it's time we stop reacting, she said, and start leading. Riley raised her glass. To the women they never saw coming. Madison clinked hers gently. And the love they couldn't silence. For the first time since the engagement that had started it all, the penthouse was quiet. Not with tension. Not with fear. Just silence. Riley had gone to San Francisco for a last-minute meeting about a new tech venture. Only 3 days. But her absence felt heavier than it should have. Madison walked through the apartment like a ghost, brushing her fingers over forgotten mugs, jackets tossed over chairs, pillows still holding the shape of Riley's back. They had spent so long fighting to be together, to be seen, to stay whole. And now, with no war to fight for a moment, Madison didn't know what to do with the stillness. Her calendar was full. Interviews, panels, company updates, even a new mentorship initiative. But none of it filled the space Riley left behind. On the second night, Madison stayed late in the Harper Biolab's office, staring out the window at a city that no longer scared her. She should have felt triumphant. But something gnawed at her, a pressure in her chest she couldn't name. That same evening, Riley called. They talked about nothing and everything. The hotel room she was in. The pitch meeting that went better than expected. The coffee in San Francisco being stronger. Then silence. Then, softly, Riley asked, "Are you okay?" Madison hesitated. "I'm used to chaos," she whispered. "Now that there isn't any, I feel unanchored." Riley didn't rush to fix it. Maybe peace feels foreign because it's new. Doesn't mean it isn't real. Madison closed her eyes. "I miss you." "I miss you too," Riley replied. 3 years ago, I didn't even believe in this kind of missing.
And now?
I count the hours. They hung up after a long, sleepy silence, but the feeling stayed. Restlessness. Not about Riley.
About time.
About next steps. About what came after surviving. When Riley returned, they fell into each other's arms like magnets snapping back into place. They made love without urgency, slow, lingering, breathless. Madison kissed every scar she could find. Riley held her like a prayer. But in the days that followed, something subtle shifted. Not coldness. Not distance. Just difference. Riley started talking about moving part of her tech operations back to California, not permanently, but more than occasionally. Madison nodded supportively. But something inside her curled tight. "We could do long distance for a while," Riley had said, brushing hair from Madison's face. "I wouldn't disappear." "I know," Madison replied, smiling with her mouth, not her heart. The truth was, she didn't want distance.
Not now.
Not when everything they had built felt so delicately held together. But she didn't say that. And Riley didn't push. Days passed. Madison worked longer hours. Riley took more calls from the guest room. They still touched. Still kissed. Still laughed. But the silences between them became slower to break. One night, curled up on the couch watching an old documentary, Madison finally said what had been festering for weeks. "Are we going in different directions?" Riley didn't look away from the screen.
No.
"I don't think so." "Then why does it feel like we're walking side by side but looking at two different horizons?" Riley turned her head. "Because we are. And maybe that's not wrong." "How can it not be wrong?" Madison asked, voice thin. "We fought so hard to be here. Together." "Exactly," Riley said. "And now we're finally safe enough to grow. To stretch. To want more than just not losing each other." "But what if we stretch too far?" Riley took her hand. "Then we hold tighter." Madison's throat closed. "I don't want to become strangers again." "You won't," Riley whispered. "But we have to stop measuring our love by how close we stand. Sometimes love is letting each other move. And knowing we'll still reach for each other across the space." The words made sense. But they hurt. Madison didn't want space. She wanted solid ground. Certainty. Roots. And she was starting to suspect Riley needed wings. That weekend, during a public Q/&A for the mentorship program, someone asked Madison where she saw herself in 5 years. She froze, smiled, said the right things: empowerment, expansion, impact. But later, alone with Riley on the rooftop, she confessed the truth. "I didn't know what to say. Because I don't know if we are in that future." Riley went still. "Do you want us to be?" "Yes," Madison said instantly. "But I don't know if wanting is enough." Riley looked at her, heartbreak barely hidden. "So, what are we saying, Mads? That love got us here, but it won't carry us through what's next?" "No," Madison said, tears brimming. "I'm saying I don't know how to hold you and not hold you at the same time. I want to support your dreams. I want to keep building mine. But I don't want to lose us to all the in-betweens." Riley stepped closer, cupped her face. "Then we build the in-betweens too." That night, they didn't sleep. They talked for hours. About future cities. About kids. About what home meant when both their careers might take them to opposite coasts. It wasn't an argument. It was raw, aching clarity. For the first time, they admitted the shape of the life they were building might not match the story everyone else saw. And that love, even theirs, needed more than fire. It needed foundation. Eventually, Madison rested her head on Riley's chest and whispered, "Promise me something." "Anything." If we ever lose each other, we find our way back, no matter how far. Riley kissed her hair. Always. But we're not losing each other. We're just learning how to hold on in motion. Morning came too soon, but it brought light. And with it, something like hope. Complicated. Imperfect.
Real.
There's a silence that doesn't come from lack of sound. It comes from the weight of something unspoken, something both people feel but neither wants to name. That silence had settled between Madison and Riley like fog. It wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. But it lingered in the space between their bodies at night, in the hesitation before every kiss, in the way their laughter now came a second slower than before. It had been 3 weeks since their rooftop conversation, since Madison had confessed her fear of losing Riley in the in-betweens, and though they had vowed to build a future together, the cracks beneath that promise were beginning to spread. Not because the love was fading, if anything, it had only deepened, but because love, they were learning, was not a guarantee of synchronization. Riley's tech project in San Francisco had been greenlit for expansion. Her presence would be needed there 6 months out of the year. Madison's leadership role at Harper Biolabs had only grown, and walking away now would be seen as surrender. Neither of them wanted to compromise their purpose, and neither wanted the other to shrink. So they kept smiling, kept saying, "We'll figure it out," kept pretending that planning future flights between coasts was the same thing as planning a life. One night, Madison came home from a conference to find Riley sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by open folders and a half-packed suitcase. Her back was to the door. Madison stood there in silence for a moment, watching her, heart pounding. "Are you leaving already?" Riley turned. "I told you I fly out Thursday." "I know," Madison said. "I just thought we'd have more time to." She stopped.
To what?
"Say goodbye? Pretend nothing was breaking?" Riley stood slowly. "I don't want to fight." "We're not fighting," Madison said. "That's the problem. We're both just waiting for the other to say it first." "Say what?" Madison met her eyes. "That we're not in the same place anymore." "Not really." Riley looked away. "I love you." "I know. Then what are we supposed to do with that?" Madison walked over, sat on the edge of the couch. Her voice was quiet. "Maybe we have to ask if love is enough right now. Not in theory. Not in fairy tales. In real life. In this life." Riley sat beside her. "I don't want to lose you. Neither do I. But you also don't want to leave Boston." Madison turned to her. "And you don't want to stop building what you've started." Riley reached for her hand. "If we try harder, maybe." "We've been trying," Madison said gently. "Every day. And we've built something incredible. But we're both exhausted. And that kind of tired, it doesn't make space for growth. It just stretches until it rips." "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we don't have to break this to let it breathe." Riley frowned. "I don't understand. What if we chose to pause?" Madison whispered. "Not because we don't love each other, but because we do. Because I want to remember this as something beautiful, not something that slowly died while we forced it to survive." Riley's breath caught. "You're talking about space." "I'm talking about choosing distance before life forces it on us with resentment attached. Like a break." Madison nodded slowly. A pause. Time to focus on who we're becoming individually. Not forever, but long enough to come back with clarity. Riley stood and paced the room, emotions flickering across her face. Disbelief, pain, understanding. And what if we don't come back? Then at least we'll know we didn't let it rot from inside. Madison's voice cracked. Then we'll know we were brave enough to walk away while it was still love. Riley looked at her, tears now in her eyes. "You're killing me with kindness, you know that?" Madison stood too, walked over, took her face in both hands.
No.
"I'm loving you honestly. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing not to pretend that everything will work out just because I want it to." "But I still want it to," Riley whispered. "I still want you." Madison kissed her, soft and slow, salt on their lips from both their tears. "Then come back to me," she whispered, "when we're both ready to stay." That night, They held each other in bed like they were already memories. There was no anger, no blame, only grief in its purest form, the ache of choosing to protect something by stepping away from it. At dawn, they stood in the kitchen, sipping coffee in silence. Madison reached for Riley's suitcase. "You packed everything?" "Not everything," Riley said. She pulled a ring from her pocket, the simple band Madison had slipped onto her finger the day of the wedding neither of them had wanted. She placed it on the counter. "Hold this for me." Madison's hand trembled as she picked it up. "Only if you come back for it." Riley nodded. "You'll know when I'm ready." Madison walked her to the elevator. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't say see you soon. They just kissed, long, breathless, final in its restraint, and then Riley stepped inside.
The doors closed.
Madison stood there for a long time, the ring clutched in her hand, the weight of their love pressing against her ribs like a heartbeat she couldn't quiet. Back inside, the apartment was still, not empty,
Just paused.
like a page mid-turn, waiting for the story to continue. The first week without Riley felt like learning to breathe underwater. Madison moved through the apartment in a daze, her body still reaching for habits that no longer made sense, setting 2 coffee mugs instead of 1, turning to make a comment during breakfast and finding silence, instinctively texting Riley updates and then deleting the message before pressing send. The ring sat on the marble countertop, untouched, gleaming in the morning light like a wound that hadn't closed. She hadn't worn it since Riley left. She couldn't. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel fair. But she also couldn't put it away. It stayed exactly where Riley had left it, between them, in absence and promise. Days turned into weeks. Madison threw herself into work, into speeches, into community programs, into anything that allowed her to keep moving. The mentorship program flourished. She was invited to speak internationally. Her name began appearing in magazines with headlines like "The Face of Corporate Revolution" and "How Madison Harper Rewrote the Rules." But success was no substitute for presence. She came home every night to a quiet apartment and crawled into a bed that still smelled like someone who hadn't stopped loving her. She kept Riley's toothbrush by the sink, her hoodie on the back of a chair. Not out of denial, but as a tether. Proof that what they had lived was real. That this wasn't a breakup. This was something else. Something harder. Something quieter and more sacred. Grief without anger. Love without touch. On the 27th night, Madison had a dream. She and Riley were dancing in the kitchen, barefoot, music low. Madison was laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. Riley pulled her closer, cupped her face, and whispered, "You're still mine." Madison woke up crying. The next morning, she didn't go to work. She sat on the floor of the living room with a photo album Riley had made months before. Pictures from the engagement gala, their first clumsy cooking night, the gala where Riley had defended her, a candid photo of them asleep on the couch, arms tangled. On the last page, there was a post-it note, Riley's handwriting small and messy. "We didn't choose how this began, but we get to choose how it ends." Madison closed the album slowly, picked up the ring, held it in her palm like a prayer. The next day, she booked a ticket to San Francisco. She didn't call, didn't text. She just went. She walked through the city streets with a scarf pulled over her face, avoiding attention, feeling the pulse of the city Riley loved so much. It was sharper here, louder, but somehow still held echoes of her. Madison found the address Riley had once mentioned, her office for the tech initiative. A small converted brick building tucked behind a coffee shop. She stood across the street for a long time, unsure what she was doing, unsure what she would say. Then she walked away. She wasn't ready. Not yet. But the city had reminded her of something she needed to feel in her bones. Riley wasn't gone, just elsewhere. And distance was not absence. When she returned to Boston, something inside her had shifted. Not healed, but strengthened. She started writing again, not speeches, not press releases. Letters. To Riley. She never sent them. She wrote them in a leather notebook and filled page after page with truths she hadn't known how to say aloud. "I miss you most when I'm laughing," she wrote. Because you were always the echo. Sometimes I reach for your hand in my sleep, and sometimes I feel like you're still holding it. I'm not building a life without you. I'm just building enough space so that when you come back, there's room for all of you. Months passed. Autumn turned to early winter. Snow began to dust the corners of the city. Madison grew stronger. Not less in love, just more whole. She started sleeping through the night. She stopped waiting by the door. She smiled without guilt. But she never stopped hoping. Then one evening, everything changed. She had just returned from a keynote event, tired, heels in one hand, makeup faded. When she noticed the lights were on in the kitchen, her heart stopped. She stepped forward slowly, every muscle tense, her mind racing through impossible scenarios. And then Riley turned the corner. She looked exactly the same. No dramatic change. No announcement. Just her. Standing there in the apartment like she'd never left. Madison couldn't speak. Couldn't move.
Hi, Riley said.
Madison's voice cracked. Hi. I didn't want to call, Riley continued, stepping closer. Because I didn't want to ask permission. I just wanted to show up. If you'd let me. I'm dreaming, Madison whispered. You're not. Riley took something from her pocket. The ring. I'm ready to stay, she said. Not because I finished everything I was supposed to do, but because I finally understand that I don't have to complete myself before choosing you. I just have to keep choosing you every day, and trust that we'll keep becoming together. Madison's knees nearly gave out. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Riley like she'd been holding her breath for months and had just found air. I was so afraid you wouldn't come back. I was afraid too, Riley whispered. But missing you didn't hurt nearly as much as not loving you up close. I never stopped, Madison said, voice shaking. Not even for a second. Riley stepped back, cupped her face. Then marry me again. This time for us. Madison nodded, tears falling freely now.
Yes.
1,000 times yes. They stood in the middle of the kitchen, forehead to forehead, both crying, both smiling, both finally whole again. Not because they'd solved everything, but because they'd walked through the fire separately and still found their way back. That night, Madison placed the ring back on Riley's finger. No ceremony, no vows, just the truth between two hands and two hearts. And as they curled into bed together, tangled in warmth and forgiveness, Madison whispered, we didn't need to fall apart to prove we were real. But maybe we needed the space to see how far our love could reach. Riley kissed her. And now we build. For real. For always. There was no press release. No announcement. No curated photo shoot or family-approved headline. Just a handwritten note slid under the door of their closest friends, their mentor, the assistant who had stood by them through the chaos. We're getting married.
For real this time.
Small. Private. Come if you love us. Leave your expectations at the door. The ceremony happened on a cold Sunday in March. The sky was heavy with gray, and snow still clung to the corners of sidewalks, but inside the old glass conservatory Riley had chosen, tucked behind a museum, almost forgotten by time, there was only warmth. 30 chairs. One aisle. No altar. Just light filtering through aged glass, hanging ferns, and a piano playing something slow and full of ache. Madison wore white. Not satin. Not stiff. A flowing dress with long sleeves and a deep back, bare feet on warm stone. Riley wore black. A suit tailored to her frame, shirt slightly undone at the collar, hair pinned up but already coming loose. When Madison walked toward her, the room disappeared. When Riley turned and saw her, her eyes filled instantly. No one spoke as they stood facing one another. No officiant. No priest. Just them. And Riley, reaching into her pocket with shaking fingers to pull out the same ring Madison had once held in her palm like a goodbye. This time, Riley said, voice steady, I'm not marrying you to save a legacy. I'm not marrying you to please anyone. I'm not marrying you because we made a promise we didn't choose. I'm marrying you because you taught me how to stay. Because your love made me braver than my fear. Because when everything else was falling apart, you were the only thing that felt like home. Madison's voice trembled. "And I'm marrying you," she said, "because you never let me feel unloved. Not once. Not when I was angry. Not when I was silent. Not when I asked for space. And not when I didn't know how to stay. You waited for me. You fought for me. You saw me. And that is the kind of love I will spend the rest of my life becoming worthy of." They placed the rings on each other's fingers slowly, reverently, like they were drawing new maps over old scars. They didn't kiss right away. They just stood there, foreheads pressed together, breathing the same breath, holding the same promise, unspoken, but unbreakable. Then, when the music swelled, Riley leaned in and kissed Madison like she had the first time, slow, reverent, certain. And the guests, friends, chosen family, people who had witnessed them fall and rise, stood in quiet awe. No clapping, just hearts breaking open. The reception was just as simple. Long tables covered in candles. Handwritten notes in place of printed menus. Music from a friend's speaker. Laughter. Toasts that turned into tears. Madison stood at one point to speak, her voice clear. "For so long, I thought love was something you earned. Something that came after perfection. But it isn't. Love is what makes the imperfection bearable. Love is what stays after the performance ends." She raised her glass. "To every woman who's ever been told to sit down, to shrink, to hide who she loves, may you know that love is not weakness. It is the revolution." Riley stood after her, quieter, less polished. "I didn't believe in marriage," she said. "Not really. And maybe that's because the world told me people like me didn't belong in fairy tales. But Madison didn't give me a fairy tale. She gave me something better. She gave me a home I didn't have to earn." The rest of the night was slow and soft. They danced. They laughed. Madison cried into Riley's shoulder during their first dance, and Riley whispered, "It's over. The hard part is over. Now, it's just us." And it was. A week later, they disappeared into the countryside for their honeymoon. No phones. No cameras. Just each other. They made love like they had waited their entire lives for the permission to be gentle. They woke slowly, cooked breakfast barefoot, read poetry aloud under blankets. One morning, Riley rolled over and stared at Madison's sleeping face and whispered, "We did it." And Madison, half awake, smiled.
No.
"We're doing it." They spent a month like that, healing, reclaiming, choosing. And when they returned to the city, things had changed. But not them. Their careers were still waiting. The world still had questions. But their love, steady, quiet, earned, didn't waver. Madison restructured her company's leadership model to reflect the new world she was building. Riley opened a mentorship incubator in San Francisco, but kept an apartment in Boston. They commuted back and forth, yes. But it was different now. Because they were building together, not apart. Every Sunday, no matter where they were, they called it a stay. No work. No screens. Just walks, letters, music, or sex on the floor. Just remembering how far they'd come. Once, months later, during a panel, a journalist asked Madison, "Do you believe in fate? In soulmates?" Madison paused. Thought of the first time she saw Riley in that engagement party. Of how much she'd hated her. Of how she had fallen in love not with the idea, but with the person, flawed, stubborn, real. "No," she said. "I don't believe in fate. I believe in choosing. I believe that love is not what finds us. It's what we keep showing up for. Over and over again." Riley, in the audience, smiled. Madison met her gaze and smiled back. The kind of smile you only wear when you've lost and found the same person and know they'll never leave again. And when the lights dimmed and the crowd applauded, Riley didn't wait. She walked straight to the stage, pulled Madison into her arms, and kissed her like they were still learning how to be each other's, and always would be. If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $sign icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you.